What's up, Dynasty owners? I'm Matt the Jerk here with your weekly article and video review. So today we're just going to jump right into it. Don't have much news going on. As I talked about last week, a lot of the free agents have signed, so don't have much news. The only thing I did want to mention is the fact that Blake Bortles signed with Green Bay. You can read into it what you want. I think that whole situation right now is kind of a mess. There's really no predicting what's going to happen with Rodgers, so that's really the only news. He signed with them, giving them a little bit of insurance in case Rodgers can't go. Obviously, he's not even close to Rodgers' level if he doesn't play. So let's continue. Today we're going to be talking about some more blind comparisons, and we're going to be talking about the Buffalo Bills. So a little background on the Bills. They finished first in the AFC East last year. They had a 13-3 record. They're the only team in the division that made it to the playoffs, and they got eliminated in the AFC Championship game. So most of their success, as we know, came through the air. They passed on almost 62% of their plays. So that's 11th among all NFL teams. So right around the middle, maybe a little bit above average in passing. Biggest success was obviously to Stephon Diggs, the new connection that was found between Diggs and Josh Allen. I'm not going to give their full stats right away, because Diggs is actually going to be one of the players in our blind comparison. So let's get into it. Like I mentioned in my last video and article, if you read and saw that, so what I had done in the past is I would do blind comparisons with just two sets of stats, and then you have to figure out who one of the players was or who each player was. What I'm doing for this series is I'm giving you a player's name and then a set of stats for the other player. So it's kind of relies on your memory to remember how a player did last season, and then compare it to those set of stats. So we'll get into it. The first comparison, and I'll actually throw this on the screen so you can see too. First comparison we have, and as always, question is, who would you rather own? This is in Dynasty Owner. So we have player A, Alpha. He's 23 years old. Here's his 2020 stats: 17.8 fantasy points per game. He'd have had 285 if he played all 16 games based on that average. 80 receptions, 1,226 yards, 13 touchdowns. That's, again, based on a 16-game season for his average production. And he missed 2 games in 2020. I started to add his 2021 projected stats, right around 19 fantasy points per game, 92 receptions, 1,400 yards, 11 touchdowns. So he's projected to have, he had a very good 2020. He's projected to have an even better 2021, at least based on receptions, yards, touchdowns. Those are kind of, so you can't really predict them. But so you compare those stats, which are very good, with Stephon Diggs, as I mentioned earlier. So does anybody know off the top of their head if Diggs had a better season than player A? And the answer is that he has. He had actually quite a bit better season. It's really hard to remember how good of a season he had when we're not actually in it, but he did have a better season. Diggs ranked wide receiver 3 on the season, and he finished only behind Devontae Adams and Tyreek Hill. So very impressive. But how much better was he is the question. Here's both of their stats next to each other. So Alpha, 23 years old, 18 points per game. I've read you all this already. 80 receptions, 1,226, 13 touchdowns based on 16-game season. Diggs, he's 27. He had almost 21 points per game. He had 127 receptions, 1,535 yards, and 8 touchdowns based on a full 16-game season. So the difference between wide receiver 3 and wide 11, where Alpha finished, it's not negligible. It's a big jump, especially when you start getting into those, elite receivers on Diggs. In fact, if you use their average, Alpha would have outscored. Diggs would have outscored Alpha by almost 50 points. So quite a bit of a difference between those two. Diggs is clearly the player that you want based on just his first set of stats. But here's, we're in Dynasty Owner, so here's where it obviously gets interesting is Diggs' contract. He's at $14.4 million next 3 years. And Alpha, he's at $1.4 million for the next 2 years. So, like I said, this is the ultimate dilemma in Dynasty Owner. And it makes Dynasty Owner the greatest platform on earth. Is you have to figure out what's that cost. Is it cost effective to take on that Diggs contract for probably 30 to 60 extra points? And that's projections. That's not even, obviously guaranteed to happen. So this is what I boil it down to. This is what you have to decide, because this is essentially what the 2020 season was. Do I want 100% of Diggs' production? You take Diggs, you get 100% of production while paying close to $15 million per year. Or would you take 80% of Diggs' production with 1/10 of the cap hit? And the answer for me would be to take the cap hit. I'll take the 10th of the cap that I would be paying, and I'll take the 90% discounted salary. So it's up to everybody to decide. It also depends on where you're drafting Diggs or where you're drafting Alpha. If you can get them a few rounds apart, then maybe it's worth it, especially if you save a little bit earlier or later in the draft. But that's the ultimate, dynasty owner conundrum: is where do I save and when do I save and how do I do it? So for what it's worth, Alpha was A.J. Brown. So Brown had a phenomenal 2020. He's going to have an even better 2021 unless he gets injured, and we hope that doesn't happen. And I'll have Brown ranked higher than Diggs in my initial rankings. That's just how it works with these low contract players, especially ones that have a few more years left on their contracts. Let's get into a second comparison. Throw the stats back up on the screen for you. Who would you rather own? Player C, which is Zach Moss, or Delta? And here's Delta stats. He's 23 years old. 2020 season, he had 13.7 fantasy points per game, 219 rushes, 17 yards, 9 touchdowns based on a 16-game season. He missed 2 games. So he obviously, had less rushes, yards, and touchdowns than that. But this is just if he'd have played all 16 games based on his average. And his 2021 projected stats are right around 19 fantasy points per game, 206 rushes, 919 yards, 11 touchdowns. So they're predicting an uptick for him coming into this next season. It's no surprise Zach Moss didn't have as good a season as Delta. I think everyone pretty much knows that. He split time with Singletary. He was a rookie, so it's to be expected, especially with a running back. So no real surprise that he didn't live up to Delta's stats, at least in 2020. Actually, the most touches that Moss received in any game was 14. So I don't want to say it's disappointing because, like I said, he is a rookie. So I mean, it's just how it goes. I expect he'll play a lot more this year. Probably predicting that he takes over the role from Singletary. Hopefully he become that workhorse back that the Bills drafted him to be. But let's see how the player's salaries compares because we don't really know much about Delta. If you remember about Zach Moss, he makes a little more than $1.5 million over the next 3 years. And Delta is going to make a little over 1.7 for 1 more year. So it's another thing you got to consider. You're only getting that 1.5. You're only getting that 1.7 for Delta for 1 more year. We don't know who he is yet, so we don't know if his cap is going to go up, down, or what. But let's look at the team dynamics and see if we can figure out who Delta is. We all know Moss is set up. He's going to be competing for playing time. I don't know who's the more talented. I would think that Singletary is a more talented back from what I've seen from both of them. But that doesn't mean that he's going to be the guy. I think Moss brings a real threat, especially around the goal line that a lot of coaches, especially the Bills, are going to need as they compete for the Super Bowl and actually look like they have a good chance to get to it this year. So the silver lining for both these fantasy players is that Buffalo went the entire draft without. So that's good news for both players. They didn't seem to think that was big enough for them to add, especially earlier on in the draft, which would have been kind of devastating to both of their fantasy value. But we talk about Delta. He's got his share of backfield issues too. They're in a committee without giving too much away. There's not really an issue with the backfield. The backfield is fine. They did very well last year. His team did, but it's crowded. Backfield's probably more stacked than Buffalo's in terms of actual bodies, but I wouldn't say that they're better talent-wise. So who is Delta? Delta is Ronald Jones. So you may think it's a no-brainer. I'm going to draft Jones before Moss this season, and you could be right. There's no reason why Jones couldn't outperform Moss, but like everything, it's not that simple. They're both the same age. I don't know if you remember how old Moss was, but he's 23 also, and Moss has 3 more years on his contract. Both contracts are steal of deals, but you're going to be getting Moss for 2 more years. A little more uncertainty probably, just given the backfield role and him being a rookie coming into his second year. But I would also argue that Moss has the best chance of those 2 teams of becoming his workhorse back, or at least before Jones would. We don't know what's going to happen with him next year, if he's going to get a big increase or what. So regardless, this is how the stats shake out. I'll show you these stats here real quick. So both 23 years old, Moss, right around 8 points per game, and I already told you all this, but here's Ronald Jones, 13.7. These are all based on 16 game average. So, like I said, no surprise. Ronald Jones had a better season. I'm projecting quite a bit of a better workload for Moss coming into 2021. If the choice is mine, I'll just say it. I'm going to take Moss. I'll have Moss ranked over Jones in my first rankings. It's not an easy decision, and that could change by the time I release my rankings. That might change, but at this point, I'm going to take Moss over Jones. I'm going to take those extra 2 years on the steal of a contract. It's a close one. It's not like there's a right answer. I don't know everything. Nobody knows everything, and especially when you're bringing money involved, it's not easy to predict that. So, just let me know what you think. You can follow me on Twitter, obviously at Dynasty Jerk. You can see it down here at the bottom. Let me know. Send me a message. Who do you think you would like to take in either one of these comparisons? I would think the overwhelming majority of the people are going to take AJ Brown for the first comparison, just because of the you're saving money. But this one, it might be a little controversial, Moss and Ronald Jones. So yeah, go ahead and follow us on Twitter at Dynasty Owner. Follow me on Twitter at Dynasty Jerk, and then watch all of our videos on YouTube. Follow us, subscribe on YouTube to Dynasty Owner. Other than that, I think that's all I have for you today. I hope everybody is safe. Take care.